The road north of Lethbridge was the kind of road that didn't forgive second thoughts. By the time the truck dropped her at the gate, the driver had already turned around without a word, and the dust from his wheels was the last thing she watched disappear into the gray of the October sky. She stood with her bag at her feet and looked at the gate. The hinge on the left side had been wired shut with baling wire, the kind of fix a man makes in a hurry and never comes back to. Beyond it, a long gravel track ran toward a cluster of buildings she could just make out through the bare poplar windbreak. Trees were straight, at least. That was something. She lifted the bag and stepped through. The yard told her most of what she needed to know before she reached the porch steps. A disc harrow sat in the open, with one blade cracked and the frame going to rust. The fuel tank beside the barn had a slow seep at the base. She could see the dark stain in the gravel beneath it. Two of the fence posts along the corral had heaved with frost and weren't coming back without being pulled and reset. The water trough had a thin skim of ice at one end, which meant the float valve wasn't working or wasn't in. She noted these things the way she always noted things, quietly, without deciding what they meant about the man who lived here. A farm falling apart could mean laziness. It could mean debt. It could mean something else entirely. She knocked on the door. He opened it after a moment. He was taller than she'd expected from the letters, and thinner. There was something careful about the way he stood in the doorway, not quite blocking it, not quite inviting her in. His right hand stayed at his side. The left gripped the doorframe near the top, and she noticed the knuckles were rough in the way of someone who worked hard or who used to. "You're earlier than I thought," he said. The truck made good time. He nodded and stepped back. She came in. The kitchen was clean. That surprised her. Not clean in the way of a house that was well kept, but clean in the way of a house where one person ate at one end of the table and washed one plate and put it back in the same spot every time. There was an order to it that had nothing to do with comfort. She set her bag by the door. "I'll show you the room," he said. It was small, on the north side, with a window that faced the windbreak. The bed had a quilt on it that was worn but not dirty. There was a hook on the back of the door. There was no mirror. "It's fine," she said. He seemed to be waiting for something more, and when she didn't offer it, he turned and went back toward the kitchen. She followed him because there was nothing else to do. He'd put the kettle on. She took that as a good sign. She'd answered the advertisement in August, 2 months after the funeral in Kamloops. The advertisement had been practical in its wording. Help needed on a cattle operation north of Lethbridge, Alberta. Some experience with livestock preferred, accommodation provided, and she had found something restful about its plainness. It made no promises about what the work would be or who she would find at the end of it. She had been tired of promises by then. Her sister had said she was running away. She had said she was going north. They were probably both right. In the morning, she was up before him. She built the fire in the kitchen stove from what was left in the wood box. Not much. And when she went out to the woodpile, she found it low enough to be a concern. October in southern Alberta was not a month you wanted to be short of wood. She didn't remark on it. She split what was there and brought it in and stacked it, and by the time he came down the stairs, the kitchen was warm and the coffee was on. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the stove and then at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "It needed doing." He sat at the table. She poured him coffee and poured herself some and sat across from him. The window behind her was still dark. After a while, she said, "The cows need doing at 6. "I know," she said. "I've milked before." "Both of them?" "Both." He looked at his cup. "The stanchion stick. The left one more than the right. I'll manage." He nodded and said nothing more, and she thought, he is a man who uses silence as punctuation. She had known men like that. She found she didn't mind it. She had grown up on a mixed farm south of Pincher Creek, the second of 4 children, the one her mother called the one who watches. She had learned to read weather from the color of clouds over the Rockies. She had learned that a fence post driven at the wrong angle would fail you in 3 years, not 4. She had learned that the best time to find out what a place needed was before anyone told you. Walk the land. Look at what was broken. Look at what had been repaired and how, and you would know more about the people who lived there than any conversation could tell you. She had also learned that grief changed a farm the way water changed a riverbank. slowly, from the outside, and then all at once. By the end of the first week, she had cataloged what needed doing and put it in rough order of urgency. The float valve in the trough was the first. A cow standing in ice water or going without was a problem that bred other problems. She found the part in a bin in the back of the shop and had it fixed before noon. The fuel tank seep was next. She tightened the fitting and checked the seal, and then she told him at supper that it had been weeping long enough to have lost some volume, and he should check the tractor's fuel against what he thought was in there. He looked at her for a moment. "How long do you think it's been going?" "Couple of months, maybe. The stain under the gravel goes pretty deep." He said nothing. She cleared her plate and washed it. The fence posts were a longer job. She didn't tackle them alone. On the Saturday of the second week, she came out after breakfast and found him already in the corral with a bar and a shovel, working on the first of the heaved posts. She got a pair of gloves and went to stand on the other side of it. They pulled it together without speaking much. When it was set and tamped, he moved to the next one, and she followed, and they worked down the line until the light started to go. By then, there were 7 posts reset and braced. He gathered the tools, and she carried the post-hole digger back to the shop, and when she came out, he was leaning against the corral fence looking at the sky. It was a wide sky. It was always a wide sky out here, too wide sometimes, the kind of sky that made small problems feel enormous and enormous problems feel inevitable. "Thank you," he said, still looking up. "You'd have got to it, maybe." She went inside to start supper. He came in a few minutes later, slower than usual, and she noticed the way he held his right shoulder, not quite favoring it, but careful, the way a man is careful when something has been wrong long enough that being careful has become automatic. She didn't say anything. It wasn't her shoulder. There was a grave at the edge of the property, set back from the lane in a small clearing among the poplars. She had seen it on her first walk of the land, and she had noted it and walked past and not mentioned it. It was a proper marker, granite, not wood, which meant it hadn't been done in grief and in a hurry. Someone had taken time and money to do it properly. The name on the stone was a woman's. The dates were close together, the second only 2 years after the first. She did not ask. There were things that were not her business yet, and possibly would never be, and she had learned not to confuse her own curiosity with another person's readiness. The cattle were 26 head, mostly Black Angus with a few Herefords mixed in. He ran a cow-calf operation, selling the calves in the fall, keeping back the heifers he wanted to develop. She had grown up around cattle and she knew what to look for. The herd was healthy enough. No obvious signs of illness, decent body condition for October, though a couple of the older cows were thinner than she'd like going into winter. She mentioned this to him one evening, carefully. "The 2 older Herefords," she said. "They're not putting on the way the others are." He was sitting at the table with what looked like paperwork, though he'd turned most of the pages face down when she came in. He looked up. "I've been watching them. They might need to go into a separate pen, let them eat without competition." "I know," he said. Then, after a moment, "I meant to do it in September." She said nothing. September was a month ago. "I'll do it this week," he said. He did. She noticed that. The thing about grief she had found was that it didn't make people lazy. Not exactly. It made them quiet in a way that looked like laziness from the outside. The stopped repairs, the fence that sagged, the wood pile that ran low. What it actually did was take away the reason for doing things. You could know perfectly well that the float valve was broken and still not fix it, because fixing it required believing that the cows mattered, and the farm mattered, and the winter mattered, and tomorrow mattered, and grief had a way of making all of that feel uncertain. She knew this not from books, but from the 3 monthly after the accident, when she had sat in the house in Kamloops and let the mail pile up on the counter until her sister came and dealt with it. She had not been lazy. She had been waiting for a reason. She didn't say any of this to him. She just fixed things, and she noticed slowly that he started to fix things too. The first real cold came in the second week of November. She had grown up with Alberta winters, but even so, when the temperature dropped to -23 the first morning, and she went out to the barn in the dark, her breath disappearing into the black air above her head, something in her body remembered what cold like this actually was. Not the cold of a bad autumn, the cold that settled in and didn't leave. The waterers in the barn were plugged in and working. She'd checked the heating elements in October. The cows were eating, and the barn was closed tight, and there was enough bedding. She came back inside with her hands red and her boots loud on the kitchen floor, and he was at the stove with a pan on. He put a plate in front of her without being asked. She looked at the plate and then at him. "Eggs are what I can do," he said. "Eggs are fine." They ate. Outside the kitchen window, the sky began to lighten, pale yellow over the bare fields, the kind of light that came in winter without much warmth behind it. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and felt them slowly come back. She had not written home in 6 weeks. She wasn't sure what she would say. "I'm in a farmhouse in Alberta with a man I don't know, fixing things that need fixing, and it turns out that is exactly what I needed." That was the truth of it, but she wasn't sure it would read the way she meant it. She was not in love with him. She was not even sure she liked him yet, not in the way you like a person when you know them. She knew the way he measured his words. She knew he made coffee too strong and drank it anyway. She knew he went to the barn twice in the night when a cow was close to calving, and that he was precise about it. The same time both nights, 12:30 and 3, she could hear his boots on the stairs. She knew that on Sunday evenings he sat by the window with a book he never seemed to make much progress in, and that he looked out the window more than he looked at the page. She knew these things. She didn't know him yet. The calving started earlier than expected. The first heifer went in the 3rd week of November, a young one, first calf, who'd been doing fine and then wasn't. She found her at the 1 o'clock check, down in the corner of the pen, and she went back to the house and knocked on his door without ceremony. He came downstairs pulling his coat on. He didn't ask what the problem was or whether she was sure. He just came. They worked on the heifer together for 2 hours. He was steady and quiet and careful, and she watched him and thought, he knows what he's doing. There was a sureness in his hands that she hadn't seen from him before, something that the months of letting things slide hadn't taken away entirely. Whatever had been wrong, it hadn't touched the part of him that knew cattle. The calf came at close to 3 in the morning, alive and confused and long-legged. The heifer got up almost immediately and turned to it. He straightened up and put his hands on his thighs and looked at the pair of them. She was watching his face. She didn't do it on purpose, but she saw the look that came over it. Something that opened and then closed very quickly, like a door in the wind. She went to get towels. In December, her sister called. She sat on the bed in the north room with the phone and the dark window above the windbreak and listened to her sister talk about Christmas and the drive out from Kamloops and whether it was too far. "How is it there?" her sister asked. She thought about how to answer. "Quiet," she said. "Cold. Are you coming back?" She was quiet for a moment. "Not for Christmas." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Are you all right?" She thought about that too. The calving pen, the fence posts, the grave in the poplars that she still hadn't asked about, the eggs on the plate without being asked. "Yes," she said. "I think so," and she meant it in a way she hadn't meant much of anything since August. She learned about his shoulder by accident. He'd been in the shop working on the baler. Not a job for winter, but he was working through a list he'd made himself and hadn't said anything about. And she heard something from across the yard and went to check and found him standing very still with his right arm down and his jaw set. "Let me see," she said. "It's nothing. You're standing like it's something." He turned toward her reluctantly. She didn't touch it. She just looked at the way he was holding it, the angle of his shoulder, the way the muscles along the right side of his neck were braced. "Old injury," he said. "I figured. Tractor," he said. 3 winters ago. She did the math without meaning to. 3 winters ago was when the dates on the stone were. She didn't say anything. He would tell her or he wouldn't. "She was driving," he said after a moment. Just that. She was driving. She understood the rest of it. Not all at once, but the shape of it. The accident. The survival that felt like a punishment. The year of not fixing things, because fixing things meant believing in a future that felt like a betrayal. She said, "Can you still work the shoulder?" "Mostly. Not the way it was. There are things that help," she said. "Stretches. Physio in town could tell you." He looked at her. "You're very practical." "Yes," she said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know," she said. January was hard. The kind of hard that Alberta delivers without apology. 40 below for 2 weeks running. the cows needing constant checking, the water lines requiring heat tape and vigilance, the diesel in the tractor thickening until she learned to plug it in the night before she needed it. She was tired in a way she hadn't been since harvest seasons as a girl. A bone tiredness that came not from one thing, but from the accumulation of everything. But there was a kind of satisfaction in it that she hadn't expected. She had grown up knowing how to do this work, and she had spent several years doing work that was indoors and organized and measured in different units. And she had found that work good enough. But there was something about this cold and land, this open and animals that needed things. There was something about that which reached a part of her that had been quiet for too long. He noticed, she thought. He was a noticing person when he was paying attention. One evening in January, after a particularly long day, he came into the kitchen where she was sitting with her coat still on and her boots not yet off, and he put a mug of something on the table in front of her. Tea, not coffee. She hadn't told him she preferred tea in the evenings. She looked at the mug. He sat down across from her. "You looked cold," he said. "I was cold. You're less cold now." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "Getting there." He nodded and picked up his own cup, and they sat there in the kitchen in the January quiet, and outside the wind moved across the fields and the windbreak absorbed it, and the house held. She made it through the winter because she had decided to make it through the winter. That was the truth of it, simpler than she would have liked. She had arrived in October as something like an experiment. Her own experiment. Though she hadn't named it, that in somewhere in November or December she had stopped thinking of herself as someone who might leave and started thinking of herself as someone who was staying. She didn't tell him. There was no reason to. The decision was hers, and it lived in her, and that was enough. But she thought he might have noticed. He was careful about things in the way of a man who had been worried about losing something and had not yet stopped being worried. The calving season, when it came in earnest in February and March, was the thing she had been waiting for without knowing it. 32 calves, most of them clean and strong. There were 2 difficult nights that she handled mostly herself when he had a sick heifer that needed all of his attention in the other pen, and she got through both of them and the calves survived. And she was not sure she had ever felt as competent in her life as she did in those hours. Not proud exactly. Just sure of herself in a way that had no performance in it. He found her one morning in the pen with a calf she'd been watching. It had been slow on its feet, hadn't nursed well in the night. She'd been sitting with it for an hour when he came in. He stood at the gate. He looked at the calf and then at her. "It nursed at 6, she said. "I want to watch it for another hour." He came in and sat on the rail beside her. They watched the calf together. It was doing better, standing more easily, moving with the sort of shaky determination that a calf has when it's decided to live. After a while, it went to the heifer and nursed again, and she felt something in her chest ease. "You stayed all night," he said. "Part of it. You didn't have to." She looked at him. "I know," she said. He looked back at her for a moment longer than he usually did. Then he looked away. "There's coffee," he said, "when you're ready." Spring came the way it comes on the prairie, not gradually, but in arguments. 3 warm days, and then a blizzard, a week of rain and then a week of wind, and then suddenly mud everywhere and the smell of things waking up. The poplars at the windbreak went from bare to budded to green in what felt like less than 2 weeks, and the fields she had looked at all winter as arrangements of brown and white began to show the faint suggestion of something different. She was in the kitchen garden by the first week of May. It had been let go, she'd seen that in October, but the soil underneath the weeds was still good, dark and dense, and smelling like something alive. She turned it over with a fork and amended it, and started seeds on the windowsill in the south room, and he watched all of this without comment for about a week before he offered to help. "I don't know much about gardens," he said. "That's all right," she said. "I do." He turned out to be a patient and precise student. He followed her instructions exactly and asked reasonable questions and didn't try to improve on things he didn't understand yet. She found she liked teaching him. It felt like a kind of conversation, one that didn't require her to say more than she had available. By June, she had been there 8 months. She thought about that sometimes. How 8 months on a farm measured differently than 8 months in a city. In fences repaired, calves born, posts reset mornings in the barn, in the accumulation of small tasks done in proximity to another person until the proximity itself became something. Not love, she was careful not to call it that yet, but something that had weight, something she was aware of. One evening in June, she came in from the garden and found him at the kitchen table with a folder of papers. He didn't turn them over when she came in. That was new. She looked at them without looking like she was looking. "Bank meeting," he said. "Next week. How is it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Better than last year," he paused. "Better than the year before." She sat down across from him. "The calf crop was good," she said. "Yes, and the fuel situation isn't costing you like it was." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. "A lot of things aren't," he said. "Costing me like they were." She looked at the table. After a moment, he said quietly, "I don't know how to say what I want to say." "You don't have to say it," she said. "I think I do." She looked up. He was not a man who found things easy to say. She had known that from October. He was someone for whom words cost something, which was why he used them carefully, which was why the ones he did use tended to land. She waited. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because of the farm, not because of the cows or the garden or the calving season. Because of," he stopped, started again, "because of what it's been like this winter. What it's been like since you came." She looked at him for a long moment. "I haven't been thinking about leaving," she said. He was quiet. "I stopped thinking about it somewhere around January," she said. "The tea." He looked almost confused. "The tea. When you made tea without being asked. I thought, this is a person who is paying attention. And I thought, I want to stay where someone is paying attention." He was still looking at her. Outside the kitchen window, the June evening was long and gold, the way evenings in Alberta get in early summer when the light finally remembers it has permission to stay. "I'm not the same as I was," he said. It came out careful, like he'd been holding it for a while. "Before. I'm not going to pretend I am." "I know," she said. "Neither am I." He nodded slowly. "That seems like the right place to start," she said. She wrote her sister that week. She sat at the kitchen table in the early morning while the coffee was on, the yard outside the window going green and wide in the June light, and she wrote the letter by hand on paper she found in the desk drawer. "I'm staying for another season at least," she wrote. "Maybe longer. The farm is in better shape than it was. He is in better shape than he was. I think I am too, though it's harder to see that in yourself. You asked in January if I was running away. I've been thinking about that. I don't think I was running away from anything. I think I was running towards something I didn't have a name for yet. I have a name for it now. I think it's just work that matters, and a place that holds you, and someone who notices when you're cold. That seems like enough. It seems like more than enough." She folded the letter and addressed the envelope and set it on the counter to mail. Then she poured 2 cups of coffee and went to call him in for breakfast.